along being tortured, wrote her own version, which the Wildlife magazine published on their online version. I think it was called Daddy's Law.
Right.
And it was even more hilarious than that one was.
We'll have to look that one up.
But that was one of the situations. I would like to say that it was unusual, but it was another situation where everything that could go wrong did go wrong.
Right.
And Sarah's reaction to it, I think it made quite an impression because she never asked to go on another patrol.
So you were going to do a patrol on duck hunting, right?
Yes, we were out on the duck patrol down on Edisto River, and things started going bad with the drive in. It was one of those black nights where if with the headlights off, you couldn't see your hand in front of your face.
Right.
And I missed a turn and wound up down in the middle of a bunch of planted pines, pulling a 14-foot John boat behind me in a rickety old trailer, which I had to back out mostly by hand and turn it around and then get the car turned around in between all those closely planted trees and haul back out to the main road to the landing, at which time one of the boat trailer wheels went flat and eventually came off the rim before I got to the landing, which made backing it down the ramp even more difficult.
I bet.
And then I was so discombobulated by that, I had forgotten in the process of backing the boat down to put the plug in.
Oh, man.
In the boat, and it sat there while I was getting everything straight and filled up with water, and I had to get in the boat and run all the water out of it.
Right. And you do that by pulling the plug and throwing the boat in gear as fast as you can. For those people that don't do this very often, you pull the plug traditionally and you run the boat up as high RPM as you can. Try to plane it off until the water runs out of the back of the boat, at which point in time you got to stick the plug back in before the boat comes off plane. Otherwise, all the water runs back into it, right?
That's correct.
So you got to have about four hands to do it.
Had been there a few times.
Oh, yeah. I'm very familiar with the process. Okay, so the boat sank, or just about sank, and you had to run the water out of it. All right, so what happens next?
Well, I pulled back up at the landing to drive the car out, and the rimless wheel, or the tireless wheel, got caught at the bottom of the boat ramp, which had dropped off, and in the process of trying to pull it out, I jerked it too hard and smashed the rim so it was flat on one side.
Oh, man. It's
and
just getting worse and worse, isn't it?
Drug that up the ramp, and by the time I got back down, I noticed that the push pole, or the paddle, had fallen out of the back of the boat and had floated off with the tide. So I went to retrieve that. And meanwhile, I'm losing time because the most important time of the day to check for duck hunters is just before legal shooting hours.
Right.
And time was fast passing, and I finally got Sarah into the boat. At that time, I think she was almost reluctant to get in the boat with me.
I can't imagine why.
But we got underway, and it was freezing cold. My hands were already wet from putting the boat plug in and pulling it out. But we got the way we were going, and I motored in this little drain so I would have a view of a fellow down the creek that we had passed if he had shot before legal hours or had shot any illegal ducks.
Right.
And sure enough, he did shoot twice before legal shooting hours. And I swear I saw him shoot a third and a fourth wood duck. But I went to crank the boat up to go to him, and the boat was high and dry. All the water had ebbed out of that little drain, and was using the push pole to try and wedge my way out, and broke that in half.
Oh.
And Sarah's sitting up there with her head pulled down in a parka, in a depth parka, and you could hear this scream, this long drawn out cry from down inside the parka. She was trying to hold back from laughing out loud.
Little girls have a way of pointing out inadequacies to their dads.
But we finally got back to the landing having made no case. By the time I got to the guy, he had managed to stuff the ducks down in the mud or hit them somewhere, but I couldn't find them and couldn't make a case.
Right.
Just of what I thought I had seen. And I did write him a ticket for shooting early. So the morning was not a complete failure. But the radio, the walkie-talkie I had become immersed in water, and the battery went dead on it, and I couldn't make a call out for any help, and I couldn't get the thing cranked. So we had to float the rising tide back to the landing, at which time I used the top half of the push pole to make my way to the landing. And I backed somebody else's trailer down and picked up the boat, which I dropped off at the top of the landing.
Right.
And went back downtown and got a tire and came back and got a new tire on the trailer and had dropped off Sarah, and I left a long note, which I think they tacked up on the bulletin board of the clubhouse on Jahasi Island. And they all got a big laugh out of it.
I'll bet they did. That was the Maybanks at that time?
Yeah, and I wasn't laughing.
I bet you weren't.
No.
I bet you weren't. I know a lot of the Maybanks, and I can imagine the laughs that morning. Well, Ben, you have the perspective of Tom. on your side, and having that perspective and spent, a lifetime in the outdoor law enforcement world, how do you think we're doing? I mean, do you think conservation wise, let's talk about that. Are we on the right path? Are we on the wrong path? Why? I mean, where are we in this pendulum of doing good or doing bad?
Well, I think South Carolina is way ahead of the curve. We've got enlightened laws. We've got well-trained law enforcement officers, game wardens. They're a lot better equipped and more knowledgeable than I was when I came on. And you read about some of the cases that they are making now and are no less hair-raising than when I was making them when I was on. And I think we're in a good spot in South Carolina, albeit with a dwindling number of hunters and fishermen.
Yeah, let's talk about that for just a second, if we can. I struggle with this a little bit too. Horry and Charleston specifically. Georgetown's getting it a little bit too, but Horry, Georgetown, and Charleston have had huge influxes of, let's just call it migration from the Northeast. Okay, I mean, on an unprecedented scale. In fact, Horry County, largest growing county in the nation, or second largest growing county in the nation, with the number one municipality being Myrtle Beach, the number one fastest growing municipality in the nation. And so that puts a lot of pressure on infrastructure and natural resources because, I mean, typically, we may have, 40,000 South Carolinians fishing at any given time with fishing licenses, and every year that may be more and more, but those people are not the kind of people that we're used to in terms of their pursuit of the natural resources. They're more like weekend warriors at best. And I struggle with the idea of, encouraging people to get into the sport. That's my natural inclination, is to encourage people to get into the sport. I just think it's necessary for the long-term survival of hunting and fishing. But I struggle with the balance of knowing that we have this huge migration of people. And at the end of the day, is that what's best for us and for the natural resources? At the rate we're going, I don't know. It's just an internal struggle with myself. Do I encourage these people to get into fishing? Do I encourage these people to get into hunting? Because does that turn into another 100 people from New York and New Jersey and Pennsylvania who are going to go get a fishing license tomorrow or a hunting license tomorrow and start tackling our resources? And so it is a real internal struggle for me, and I'd just like to hear your perspective on that.
Well, the real problem is more people on a limited amount of land available. Back in the old days, there was a lot of rural land in South Carolina. You see a lot of that now being buried under modern development in areas where you used to see mile after mile of undeveloped forested land bordering the intercoastal waterway is now wall-to-wall houses and docks. Right. All the way from Charleston almost to Santee River. Right. And that's bound to have an effect. It's also more dangerous when you have a bunch of people that grew up under different hunting expectations, roaming around on land in the middle of deer drives and